Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me for another episode of FORMCAST. My name is Eric Gallina, and I'm the founder of Form Trends. And today I have a guest who is someone that's known to me for a very long time. I've been following Amko Leenarts' career since he was back in the day at Peugeot. And I want to say that it's been about 15 years since I've known you.
Is it really that long? Wow.
Which seems crazy to say, but yeah, I mean, I've known you for a very long time. So, welcome, Amko Leenarts, everybody. This is a great pleasure to have you here. I know that I'll just give a quick summary, I suppose, and then we'll jump into some of the more pressing questions that I would like to ask you. But essentially, you are now Director of Design for Ford of Europe, and you are in near Cologne, and the name of the town is something that you could probably say better than I, so I'm not even going to attempt that one.
Merkenich.
There you go. And now you see why I didn't even want to attempt that.
That's fine.
But you're also responsible for the design studio in England, in Dunton, as well as the Engini strategic design studio, which differs from being an advanced design studio, and we'll get into why that is in a little while. But basically, I really appreciate you taking the time here, because as a designer, your career is quite interesting, because you, as far as I know anyway, and this is my understanding, perhaps you can correct me if this is incorrect, but you are not a lifelong petrolhead. You are not the guy that was like, I need to draw cars when you were 3. And that to me is interesting, because you started out life as an architect, and in your professional life, that is, and then you somehow made it into Peugeot's design studio. And I've heard the story before, but I really think that it's worth telling again how it is that you started a career in automotive design, because I absolutely love this story, and I think others will really benefit from hearing it if they don't know it.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and thank you very much as well to take precious time out of your evenings. So we are both doing the same thing. It's because we are extremely passionate about what we do, and that's what has connected us, I think, in the last 15 years. It is partly true, the story that you started telling. I am a lifelong petrolhead, actually. Okay. I just got what I call distracted. From the early days on, I was definitely a petrolhead, in the sense of I didn't know what to do with Lego until there were wheels for sale. My mom and dad, I drove them crazy with all the car stuff that I really wanted to do the whole day. My mom was actually an artist. She was a painter. My dad was a director of a company. So, what would be better in the end as an outcome that I combined those two really good talents into what I'm doing now. But these parents of mine were hippies, so they were actually anti-cars. We had the public train car that we had to do things with, which, the reason why I'm telling you, it probably made cars even more desirable. I couldn't have them, right. It's the little things that I remember that when we did have a car once in a while, that I remember little buttons and the sound and the smell, and obviously a very different time back then for that. I did when I say I got distracted, I don't think I was that ambitious in knowing what kind of steps I needed to do in order to get to a car designer's job. So I did, when I was young, saw an article about the Royal College of Art, and I did at a very young age. I think I was 9 or 10, that I thought, "Ooh, that looks really cool. That's what I want to do." But then, you're kind of I would say, local farmer boy, and you kind of do the art academy that is available to you within the city I was living in. So. That wasn't a negative, to be honest. That was a real good positive that has formed me in my design career a lot. And maybe as a little side story, one of the most precious things that I think I learned there is that my teachers at the time said that talk about beauty is forbidden. It should all be about the story, why you're doing something. And that in industrial design and in architecture is one of the most important things. So I was drilled for 5 years that beauty was forbidden. Literally, you weren't allowed to say the word.
Right.
And now, obviously, as we all know, when you get into the car design business, it's almost all about beauty. So there is an interesting contrast, but that first learning experience at the art academy, that was one of the things that really formed me. And then the second one that formed me back in the day was, I think it was still at the first year, we needed to design something, and I designed a table. And I remember the ideas that I had, I couldn't make myself. And very quickly I went in search for people that could help me and make sure that I could build the table that I wanted to build. And at the time, I was called a cheater by my classmates because I had somebody else building my stuff.
Right.
And even though I could understand what they were talking about, my teachers at the time used me, of course, as an example. They said, "Well, if you don't know how to do it yourself, find somebody else that can do it for you, or complement the talents that you have with other people's talents."
Right.
And again, I think that's been a really important kind of base for me moving forward on how to deal with a team and what kind of vision you have in design. It's not about one person or only about me. It's about a whole bunch of circumstances that need to be there in order to truly get to a outstanding result. Anyway, I finished that in 5 years. I got the most out of it what I could do. That's to say, I took a year more in order to do an internship in the States, started to travel. And I remember that one time on the plane, I thought, I'll just do this and then I can stay home forever. That was truly what I thought was going to happen. Like, I'll just do this kind of bonus internship in the States, and then I'll come back and I'll stay in the city where I lived. And obviously, little that I knew is that it was incredibly addictive to travel and to do new adventures, realizing that wherever you go, you survive. As you already stated in the introduction, right after that, I went into, I was hired by, which is now still a good friend and mentor, by an architecture firm where we designed a couple of houses and a school, which was a lot of fun, especially since we needed to win the competition against the other architecture firms. And I think what it did was, when we drew this really kind of typical architecture artist kind of drawing, I drew a couple of cars in front of it, and it looked really good. So we always joke that was the reason why the building went through.
Right.
Now, by that time, I already had 2 children. Okay. So I was pretty early on with children, which has all sorts of other reasons why I was pretty early with that. But at the age of 24, I got my first one, and from there on, we made another 4. So, but by that time, I was doing that architecture job, 2 kids, and I'm only saying that because it's important to realize the context that I did had a safe job. My wife was running a shop, so we had both a very comfortable situation. And then, bang! There's one day where I visited together with my wife in Rotterdam an exhibition of car design, and it was an exhibition about Volvo, about students making Volvos.
Okay.
And I literally started crying. I saw the stuff, I started crying, and my wife and I were in that exhibition. She said, "What's going on?" And I said, I've missed this opportunity. I know we've got a good life, but this is what I actually really want to do. And luckily, she said, "Well, this is the time that if we're getting older, you can be doing it." So she's been really vital in stimulating me to get to that next step.
The people you surround yourself with are super important. I mean, it's amazing that you had that support from your wife as well. Your family is incredibly important, I know, but she could have said, "Hey, we're not going to take a gamble. We've got something good here. We've got 2
That's my
kids.
point.
You need to provide." So
exactly.
It's great that she let you kind of do that, go after and chase that dream.
So I went to, at the time, the Volvo design studio was still in the Netherlands. There was one of the Volvo studios was there. I went to them with a portfolio that I created while I was doing my job, and basically said to them, "I just want to work here for free. I don't have any experience. I don't do a study anymore. I can't do an internship, but let me just be here." So they were really forthcoming. They let me stay for, I think, between 5 and 6 months. As an internship, we cheated the system, like I was still doing a study.
Right.
So I did made a little bit of money.
Okay.
I was living in a host family because it was at the other side of the Netherlands. So my wife was running the shop with those 2 kids, and I was on the other side making hardly any money, just starting to do what I love doing. And I thought at the time that I could get away with this.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'm in. I just need a job now. And at the time, I was guided by a guy called Fede Talsma. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, of course. Name. He's legendary.
Wonderful.
At Volvo, absolutely.
Wonderful, legendary person, and absolutely honest. And I was complaining to him one day, and I said, "Well, it's so hard to really get into this world, and why is it not more easy?" And blah blah. And he said, "Amko, it's not that difficult. You go to the right study, and with the right motivation, you'll be getting in." So he suggested that I should go to the Royal College of Art. So remember, by this time I was 26, and he said, "You have to go to the Royal College of Art, and I promise you, it's going to be easy afterwards." Then I said, "Well, yeah, as hard-headed as I've been in my life, that I think I could do my own thing." I said, "I can do it in another way." So I tried another internship in Italy. Okay. I said, "Well, if I go there, maybe then I can make it." Super naive, but with that passion, with that drive, with that I can do this. I really want to make it. I transformed an old Mercedes bus, turned it into a camper van, thinking that I could park right on the design center's parking lot with an extension cord. I only needed to use the shower, and I'm okay here. Yeah. It didn't work out that way. I did ended up in the middle of winter, just outside of Torino on a Colino, where it was cold at night and had no heating and had to drive with that camper every day to work. It was a disaster. Frankly, if there's one thing that I had to overcome there, it was that. It was that endless, and the car wouldn't start half of the time, and it was just no way I could do this. So I quit there after 6 weeks.
Okay.
Mike Robinson has done a great job trying to help me, but we couldn't make it work. In the meantime, I did apply for the Royal College of Art, and a couple of months later, I was interviewed to this, and in September I could finally start. So by the time I was 27,
wow,
moving to England, giving up the job of my wife. Luckily, I did had a financial help through the fact that my grandparents passed away. They left me a bit of money. And again, this situation where some people said, well, Amko, why would you do this? This is such a risk. You still have to study. You're 27. You've got 2 kids. You spending money that you should pay. You should put aside. And we still said, no, we're going to do this. That said, it's only the first year that I went there by myself, and then the second year, my wife came and my children came and joined me.
Okay.
So I still remember my son in Royal College of Art, at the age of 5 or 6 years old, where I took him to the Royal College of Art in his blue overall, and we were working the clay together. So really quite memorable moments, I would say.
Yeah.
Now in Royal College of Art, again, my classmates look at me a little bit different. They called me grandpa, just because of my age, because of the fact that I had children. So any advice that I could give them on girlfriends, travel, what kind of addictions, I became kind of the wisest man in the class.
Right.
So this was fun, but there was always that thing in the back of my mind where I was thinking, well, what if I don't make it? What if this is not working out? And it really felt like that, where I say we graduated. It's the way that I feel it with my family. But so we graduated in June, and we stayed over in friends' houses that were empty of people going on vacation. We didn't have any money anymore, and in the end went back to the city that I was living in before, in the city of Groningen. And I was ready to go back to architecture, because it didn't go sufficiently fast. I needed a job the next month, not half a year later or a year later. I needed a job. I had kids to feed. I had to, So I did do an interview. I did had that one day I was called by Peugeot, and it really felt like this sliding doors movie. Yeah, I could do this, or I could do something else. And I had a house that I could take. I had a job that I could take, but then I had this job in France. Didn't speak a word of French. And but I didn't have to doubt for a second. Let's go. And I remember that at the time they asked me, when can you start? I said, I want to start Monday. And they called me on Thursday. I said, I'll start Monday.
That's awesome.
So anyway, I guess 12 years later in PSA, I left as a design director in interior design, and that has been a really special time in France for sure.
Oh yeah, no, I don't doubt it. I mean, that is definitely something that I obviously want to discuss with you because, you did join Peugeot. I thought it was straight out of school, but I guess there was a couple of months in between. Nonetheless, I mean, they did give you that opportunity outside of the Royal College of Art, and you started working in France, which, for anybody trying to get a role, I mean, PSA, you had Citroën and Peugeot at the time working together, I think. But nonetheless, I mean, it's a great opportunity to be hired by a company that big, regardless of where it is. So that is a great kind of entrance into the car design world. But then what impresses me, I suppose, and perhaps it was because you were more mature. You said you were 27 years old already, and when you entered the RCA, so you had more life experience. You weren't kind of dicking around. You knew what it was. You knew what you were going for, and you were going at it. And perhaps that's why, because to me, it seems like your career just kind of did one of these, because 9 years later, after joining as an interior designer, you were head of interior design. And that right. To me is quite an accelerated pace to become head of the brand, from an interior perspective, managing all these other people, from being a lowly, interior designer. So tell me a little bit about that trajectory, because to me it's quite accelerated, and it seems like quite a short period of time you had to probably learn a lot. So what exactly prepared you for that, moving into management?
I think it's this motivational piece that you talked about in the beginning. So the moment I did arrive in France, obviously this was the moment to make a third baby.
It wasn't challenging enough for you.
It wasn't challenging enough. This was the time. But the family has been playing such a big part of the motivation for me. As you said, I couldn't dig around. I had to care. I had to take care. I couldn't say, okay, I spent 5 years just having fun, and then we'll see where it's going to take me. There was this big motivation there. I think there is something else. It's the fact that the Netherlands doesn't have any car industry, or no significant car design industry. So you knew when you were if you wanted to go in that business, you have to accept to speak another language. You have to accept to travel and to make it work. So I think this extra bit of motivation really helps you to get going. Mm-hmm. Then I think I was I've all my life I've been impatient, and that impatience has always been driving me as well. I gotta go to the next step somehow. And going into management that I did from relatively early on was, even as a project leader where I had very talented designers where I worked with. Mm-hmm. I just loved negotiating. I loved battling with other people. I loved believing in something and just pushing it through no matter what, and getting that impossible task and doing that for a wider team, not just for myself, because I loved my own design somehow, but I would admit that if somebody else's design was better than mine, and I would battle with them to get that one through. So you know, it's as much motivation motivation for myself as well as being a team player.
Mm-hmm.
There has been always a sense of for me, it's been high on my list, this kind of sense of fairness, and I think good design is not negotiable. Yeah, that is, or it is not. And hey, if somebody else was being better than me, I would try and help, and at the same time learn my own lesson and saying, okay, I got to become better as well in order to get it to the next stage and next time. And that I think moved me relatively quickly in being somebody that can help the greater cause, can pave the way for people that are maybe not so good in negotiating and selling their job. I remember whenever I draw, I draw not. I'm not concentrating even only on what I draw. I'm building the sales story in my head while you draw. I do this, and then I can say this, and I can bring this kind of metaphor in, or I can do this, And I realized pretty early on that not a lot of people are thinking that way. They just concentrate on making the design as good as they can, but it's no point if you can't sell it after.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
So with that movement, I think I need to thank the PSA management for having so much belief as well, and being able to do that with me. That said, interior design was it was and to a certain extent still is something where I did feel a kind of the king in the land of the blind when you talk about management, because most managers were exterior design people. So me getting in as a Dutch guy into that kind of level, which is full of French, to be honest. So I mean, I was the only foreigner into that level. Really again makes you motivated to stand up and stand for something that maybe if you would normally speak the language, or it would be more normal, you wouldn't make the effort. Do you understand what I mean? It just continuously about overachieving, and I think I've tried to overachieve every step of the way.
No, most definitely. I mean, you need to prove yourself essentially when you come into an organization like that. One, you've got obligations. Two, you really need to make this a successful endeavor, and I suppose your biggest critic is yourself. I mean, it always is, right? You need to prove that you can do it. You need to support your family, but also in that environment, especially when you're surrounded by French people, and you're the only foreigner, there's definitely a lot of weight on your shoulders, and therefore you need to show them, hey, I'm here too, and I can do it. And I can probably do it better. But nonetheless, one thing. So I really appreciate this insight into how you got into that first job, how you moved up into that within the corporate ladder within that first job. But there's something that's I suppose I always found endearing in you, because I've known you. You were always kind of maybe I knew you not quite when you were director and head of interior design. Maybe you weren't quite at that point in your career, but nonetheless, you were pretty high up in your career when I started, and I was just a young kid. And you always kind of gave me time. And I always appreciate people that do that, because they're not too high on themselves, right? And so to me, it seemed like you were pretty level-headed. You were very very generous as well in terms of of your time, as well as just putting yourself at the same level as others. So I suppose that kind of influences, if you will, your management style as well, because a lot of guys, they have a very unique management style which basically fits to their personality. They want to know more, they're inquisitive, and therefore they'll give more slack, more free rein to their team. And as you said earlier, they'll represent them and go to battle for them if it is something that they also can stand behind. So tell me a little bit about your management style, because that to me is the feeling that I get knowing you. But I've never worked for you. I've never worked with you, right? So tell me a little bit about how you kind of guide these younger guys, or indeed the team, because now you're responsible for the entire region of Europe with Ford. So tell me a little bit about your management style, I suppose, perhaps at that stage, and then moving on into the later stage in Ford, because that's another segment which is extremely interesting as well, and we'll get into that in more depth. So just talk about your management style briefly, if you would.
I think it's so much related to the context. So I would say I'm a chameleon.
Mm-hmm.
I can adapt quickly to what the situation is. If it's in another language, if it's a different way of working, if it's a different way of if it's a different type of culture, I can adapt to anything. So that helps me to put myself into other people and see what they see, and see what again I can do to help. So very inclusive. I try to explain why I think things are really good ideas or really bad ideas. I always give people the benefit of the doubt. You will not have me killing something in a seed and send them back with a big shouting, go back into your corner and come back when you got something. No, I will give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes it works against me, because with this personality you also getting used, and I'm perfectly aware of that. But I got to stay to myself, and I have to be there to help the industry grow, not just myself, not just even my company. I think we as designers have a responsibility that is much wider than for who we work for even. So
yeah, most definitely. There's a lot of weight on designers' shoulders now more than ever. So it's really great to hear you say that. I mean, I think, I kind of interrupted you a little bit, but I think that I get the gist of, you want to empower others. And as you say, give them the benefit of the doubt. And you've done that repeatedly because, tell me, for example, like the tiny steering wheel that was in the Peugeot 208, I think it was 208, the first generation one, which I think is brilliant because my stature, I'm not quite big, but there were other people that were complaining about it. Nonetheless, I thought it was something brilliant to push forward because it gave the interior such a different architecture, right? The IP was completely different, this tiny steering wheel. Everything about it was breaking out of what it is that we knew, right? It was something new, innovative. It changed the layout, the architecture, the even the perceived quality of the cabin, I think, was elevated because of that. Tell me a little bit about how that came about, how you stood behind that.
Yeah, I love that you started talking about a specific product, because I think we've been talking about more general about how things have been moving. that particular product I love and is one of the highlights I think of what I've been able to be part of. Again, the context was Peugeot wanted to put themselves on the map. And in order to put yourself on the map, you're not going to be kind of in the back of the class. You got to be in the front, and you have to have an opinion. You have to have a strong point of view, and you have to be stand behind it. So we at the time said, we want to be with interiors. We put that as an ambition at the time. We want to be in the center of the car magazine, of this interior that is beautiful and different, and what we call recognizable at a first glance. So anybody that could see that quickly could say, that's a Peugeot.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to do that, we needed to get something architectural that is doing something really different. Otherwise, it would have never been recognizable, because every interior has a steering wheel, has an air vent, has an instrument cluster, has all of these things. But somewhat you needed to change. I think it's the biggest achievement in I don't want to send ourselves too many flowers, but to change the proportion of an interior, because it truly changed the proportion.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very used to talking about proportion on exterior design, but we're not very used to talking about proportion on interior design, because it's less kind of evident. And here we were thinking, okay, we felt that together with a couple of team members, when we were brainstorming about this, we kind of went through that idea of how crazy is it that you have to look through this steering wheel in order to look at things and look at that instrument cluster, and the movement of the steering wheel and the way you sit in the car has all its base around that constraint. So we kind of identified that as the root cause of all trouble. So we said, well, what if we can move that root cause into something else? We must get into a new type of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
And with, again, it's not only me, but with the help of a lot of really intelligent people, we found out that with changing that steering column just a little bit, making the steering wheel smaller, we had enough space just above the steering wheel in order to place a traditional instrument cluster. Because remember, we weren't into the digital world yet.
Mm-hmm.
It still needed to be the meters that were going, from 0 to 200, whatever. Once we got there, we felt weird. We felt uncomfortable. And again, that's such a wonderful moment when you're a designer, that you're doing something and you feel uncomfortable. You're not sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that period of time that I love most, where you have to talk to each other and you have to look at it and you have to keep on working at it, and until you say, well, I think we've got something new.
Yeah.
And
innovation, man. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. And we did it on a small car, and then everybody said, oh, Amko, it's great, but you can't put it on a bigger car. And we said, why not? And we started to drive around already because we had that small steering wheel. So let's put it in every car that we got and let's start driving. And we loved it. People loved it because it felt sportive. And that was one of the things that we said at Peugeot we wanted to do. We wanted to make this hyper dynamic, sportive interior with new proportions. And
Mm-hmm.
That was able to be repeated even all the way until today, and I'm still really proud of that trajectory.
Absolutely. I mean, but that was certainly a highlight, as you mentioned. But still, it's even after all of those successes at Peugeot, and moving up and doing all of these cool things. you still kind of had the urge, I suppose, because being a designer, you're, you know, the next thing is always the challenge. You always want to be doing something new. You always want to be exploring. And you mentioned, you alluded to this earlier, in terms of the adventure, in terms of traveling, in terms of going out and seeing the world and culture and all of that. That's how individuals grow. So you were definitely tempted then by an offer that came to you from Ford. At the time, it was for, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was, yeah, it was for J-Mays, and it was 2012, right? Yeah, okay. So 2012 was kind of, yeah. So I'm trying. It was 2012, and you were named Director of Design, Interior Design Strategy. So it wasn't just interior design. It was like, you know, looking out into the future, you know, how to create something that had a sense of continuity that could project you into the future. I mean, obviously, you know, you can tell me a bit more about what that specifically entailed, but you basically did move then to Dearborn, to the mothership, to Detroit, to Michigan, which is a world away from Paris, a world away from what you got going on in the Netherlands. You know, forget, it's not London, it's not anything you knew. So culturally, you were thrown into this new mix, new company, new role, trying to think up the interior strategy for a brand that in the States is, you know, massive. I mean, globally massive, but in the States, it's like apple pie, right? It's like Ford, everybody bleeding blue and whatever, but you know what I'm talking about. So tell me a little bit about that adventure. Tell me a little bit about, you know, moving into that environment, I suppose, after you were in Peugeot and you managed to do all of these things from Europe for so long. Tell me, one, like the reasoning behind it, and two, how was that a shock to your system? Like, how did you adapt to that change?
So again, contextual motivation was really key. I had 5 kids at that time. By the time, I was making a fair amount of money, but 5 kids cost a lot of money. And I was ambitious in everything. I had not one car, we had 3 or 4 cars. We had not one cat, we had 4 cats. We didn't have one dog, we had 3 dogs. We had not a small house, but we had a huge house with a little house next to it. And so I guess the moral of that story is that I couldn't do it just with little steps. I needed to do it with big steps. And in those 12 years, and not a lot of people, I think, talk about that, there's been 3 moments, and I don't go into the details, but 3 moments where I almost left, and where you are doing interviews with other companies, and out of the 3 times, 2 times this was as far as negotiating, you know, cubicle meters in the plane for the move. And still decided to not go. Yeah. Right. So I think this urge for adventure didn't just came out of nowhere. And Amko was living a happy life in Paris for 12 years. Every couple of years there was this moment where I thought, I gotta go. I've seen it. I've done the 2nd or the 3rd generation of the same car. There is nothing to do anymore. There is nothing to learn. There's, you know, we have to change the scenery,
right?
And then definitely J-Mays came by, and I remember well at the time I was asked if I could become the interior design director of all Ford trucks in North America, and with that promise I went to and, you know, remember I didn't do a truck in my life. Right. Yeah. So I went to London to do the interview with Jay, and after 15 minutes talking, I saw the twinkle in his eyes that I know myself if I get it. And he was so enthusiastic about what I could bring to the company. that he changed that objective in the interview already. Like, you know what? I'm going to make you global. So I was baffled at the time. I was like, okay, global interior design at Ford Motor Company, that's huge. So, on my way, on my plane back to France, there was already, there was already basically enough already. So, started off as strategic design director, and that had a reason. I think Jay was an excellent leader, in the sense of that he knew when to give people the time to prepare. And first of all, because of the visa reasons, I couldn't go straight into the mothership, into Dearborn. I needed to stay in Europe for about 12 to 13 months.
Okay.
I could travel, but was kind of stuck, if you will, in Fort of Europe, because you were right. I was extremely motivated to get to the States. That has always been my dream. And I remember at Border College Bard with the other good friends that I had, I always said that my dream was to go to the States. Strategic director, the first 15 months or so was mainly about researching the company. How do they do the business? In what way do they get to their decisions? What is the state of innovation? And I have to say, at the time, interior design was okay, but it was very similar as what it was at PSA. It was kind of, as they sometimes say, interior design, inferior design. It was still somewhat into the lower levels of appreciation. And I think Jay really brought me on board to say, okay, this is what the future holds, and we need to really move on and give it the importance that we need. So in that time, I could make plans, and those plans were validated, and with it, I could move to the US and start to implement processes, product strategy, and get that going on a global level, which of course was a huge job.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I mean, you just mentioned processes, and I think I don't want to jump ahead too much, because I still want you to answer the cultural aspect of it, because when you moved to the States, I mean, there must have been some sort of shock to the system. I know, having lived there and been born and raised there, that there's still, even when I would leave and come back after a summer, there was still a shock to the system. So, but you mentioned processes. Obviously, at the time that you left to become strategic design, and obviously, yes, you mentioned, afterwards you became interiors globally for Ford, head of interiors, and that I think was a period when 2012-13, when people really started to look at interior design with a hell of a lot more importance, because before it was like exterior, and it still is to a certain degree now. People in the industry, designers, aspiring designers, certainly that's still the role that they want to go for. But the interior potential and the interior opportunity is still something that is bubbling about, but it's certainly gained a lot in importance in the last decade or so. And you were at that kind of height, and you came in with, all of this, your track record over at PSA and all of that. So obviously you were a hugely appealing prospect and candidate, no doubt, in Jay's eyes. But the processes is something that I want to discuss with you, because, like you say, designers are never quite satisfied. You're always looking for the next thing, and you're always looking to, what is that next frontier? And to me, And again, I don't want to get in too much ahead because I still want you to answer the cultural question. But you've been, in many ways, a digital pioneer for a lot of the companies that you worked for. You've always thought about tech and ways to implement that in order to make your life easier, in order to achieve different levels of creativity that you perhaps weren't able to achieve without this. So tell me a little bit about these processes as well, that you instilled, and the organization over in Dearborn, particularly, I suppose, with regards to interior design at the time.
Lots of aspects in that question, Eric. You were talking about the cultural impact.
Yeah, I think let's go with that one first.
Let's start with that one first now, and let me start by saying that, and not a lot of people know this, but when I was hired at Ford, I in that process, I promised myself I would never work in Germany, not because Germany was necessarily bad. I just didn't want to learn another language, and I just didn't want to learn another culture. I just wanted to kind of stay a bit Anglo-Saxon, or actually with my French experience, I wanted to also be expressive, and that wasn't what I was thinking about. And then obviously I needed to start in Germany. So as a message, no matter what you think you're going to get something else, and you need to adapt to that. Yeah. Then I remember that on the day we moved to the US and we arrived in the US, and again, my family has always played a really big role in it. We were able to bring all the kids. So we were there with 7. My oldest son by the time was already 18. And, you're kind of hinting, and I know you've kind of hinting already towards how the hell did you agree to go to Michigan? And I think my wife would agree with you, because that first day when we arrived, she said, Amko, 2 years and not a day longer. So she was more than ever extremely clear on how she liked it and how we have to deal with this. Now, obviously, I didn't want to hear that, because, as ambitious as I was, I thought, okay, she just needs to get some friends, and we're gonna be fine, and we can stay here maybe even forever. For me, it wasn't a bad thing at all. I wasn't dreaming about going to California or to New York. I was just happy that I could be in the Midwest. I thought they were pretty friendly. I love the winters. I'm from a cold kind of country myself, and these extreme feelings of hot summer, extreme cold winter, and everything that goes with it from a cultural perspective, I thought was great. So that for me was never a real big issue. Nevertheless, I did dive into it with all my energy and enthusiasm that I had to make it work in the US and have as much impact as I could have. What I thought was challenging in that period of time is that I think working in it was a complicated environment to work with. And that's got to do with the company. It had to do as well with my family, but the circumstances just weren't that ideal. Also, what I had to get used to is that, and I think we can all look into the history books, we weren't really doing any concept cars at Ford at the time. So here I was coming from PSA, where I knew that once a year I could freely express myself and experiment with my team. And through that grew an idea from what was maybe a little seed, but through the years became bigger and bigger and bigger, and could really turn into something differentiating, and could be applied into many different ways. Now, I kind of felt at Ford that they took a leg of me to walk, because I didn't have any concept cars to experiment with. It just wasn't a topic. And if you need to do your innovation and your team building and your being able to fail and experiment and stand up again and do it again and do something new, and you got to do that only in the time when you're doing a program, you can't. So that created for me a little bit of a let's say feeling of maybe conservatism, or I couldn't really maybe go as fast as I was used to. I was surrounded by very, very talented people, and I still am. But that idea of experimentation wasn't really in the culture. Nevertheless, I was able to do a lot of experimentation within the company that didn't become really public. But so unfortunately, I can't really talk about that. But
right.
Plenty of really cool experiments that we've done that let us grow as a team and get us to that next level of design, which was not just going from a priority from exterior to interior design, but now to this idea of experience design, which was the next level of once you've passed that interior design priority, and now get to the next level, where it's a combination of UI, UX, and form and proportion, and living in and with the product in new ways that became the new ambition. And there I was able within the company to experiment quite a lot with. One gift, I would say, was the Ford GT. That was the moment that I could really experiment on a process, even though it was a program, but it was less constrained to what a normal program was. So I could experiment more.
Right.
And there I did had a similar feeling of what I had at the time with the i-Cockpit period of PSA.
Yeah.
And that was not only because it was a great product to work on, and while you're working on it, you knew you were working on a legendary car. So what can go wrong?
Yeah.
Well, everything can go wrong, of course. But, still wanting to be able to experiment with it, and I remembered one of the things that I think was maybe worth talking about was where, together with some of my team members, we said, okay, we want to experiment with the process. We don't want to do simply a brief and then sketch out kind of the answers to what the question was in the brief, and pick a couple of directions and create a bandwidth and make it into models and decide then, your typical car design type of process. We just wanted to do something faster and more gated towards innovation and kind of an unknown result that we knew that was more interesting. And the unknown result you can only do if you have the confidence in your team and in the process that you're proposing. So what we did was we went once every couple of weeks to the head of product development in Ford with one question. And that one question was, the first time it was about, which kind of volume do you think we should live in? Is it more, so in this specific car environment, is it something that you want to be sucked into, or is it something that is far away from you? Is it more horizontal? Is it more vertical? Is it more? And we giving him a couple of options, but only purely drawings about that, not about a final design, just about volume first. And we let him choose, and giving him the confidence that whatever you choose, we can make work.
Right.
We can make it to the next step. Sorry, before that one was the inspiration source. We created 3 worlds of inspiration that we wanted to do it with. So do you want to go into kind of space, or do you want to stay on the earth and talk about massive structures that have a performance, or do you want to, so we had 3 different worlds. Which world do you want to be in? Okay, you want to be in world A. Okay, let's start working on different volumes for world A. Then we said, well, what kind of interactions are we going to do? Is it touch? Is it by voice? Is it by eye movement? Is it by, just pick one, and we'll get it to the next. And so you can get the gist that more and more we started to build a design little by little. And every time we didn't know what the next step was going to be. We knew that in the steps of the hierarchy of how to design an interior, but we didn't know which direction it was going to go. And that head of product development, he was having the trust in this, which was great. You can only innovate if you can have the trust of the people that need to help you. And we did show him every couple of weeks this, like, okay, so we started with this world, and we now have the volumes, and now we started to do this UI, and now we having a detailing concept. Are we talking more about industrial machinery, or are we talking about soft touch type of flushness, or are we talking about something else? And again, every time we came to the next level, and in the end, the design was what it was, and it was special because every moment was a conscious decision, yet another layer of surprise to what the end result of the design was. And for me, I've never repeated that process until the last one, which was the P1 concept car, where we had that similar, we didn't know what the end result was going to be. It wasn't Amko that already knew what was going to happen at the end, and we just have to do the steps to no, that didn't make sense. Right, that uncertainty, right. that element of surprise, that adaptability, that's what's making us so good in our job, and it's stimulating that creativity.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
I know I'm.
No, this is great. I mean, look, I really appreciate you bringing up the Ford GT, because I did talk with you and Bill Mangan at the time about that project when it came out. I think it was 2015, 2016. And the interior in that car was just full of innovation. I mean, I particularly loved the way that the door was like, the IP was like, you open the door and that part of the IP went. Like, I thought it was absolutely brilliant the way that you guys worked that out. But it's interesting that you now bring up the P1, because that is a much more recent project. And again, it's also like a supercar. But that's kind of besides the point. It's more the process that was able to influence and inspire and spur that innovation in the GT is also present on the P1. But so I guess, I mean, when you were in Dearborn and you were doing all of these things, you kind of were able to obviously inspire and influence the process. Then I guess almost 4 years ago now, you came back to Europe to become head of design, which is your current role, head of Ford of Europe design. And I mean, that is, now you're doing things over here, and there's one little kind of side thing that I want to go down here, one little side road like alleyway. There's only one thing that kind of inspires me more, or that I'm more interested in, or perhaps beside creativity, I'm equally interested in, I should say, and that is vehicle typology. And you kind of alluded to this a little bit in the past. I love Detroit. I love Midwestern people, so I need to put it out there. But I think that Detroit, as a foreigner going to live in the States for the first time, that would have been a huge cultural shock. And that is the one thing that I wanted to bring up. But at the same time, there's also a hell of a difference in terms of what people in the US buy from a transportation vehicle perspective and what people in Europe are used to. And I remember seeing that difference quite starkly when I was a kid going back and forth between France and the US. And so as a designer, you're kind of over there and you're like, why is the F-150 so like impressive and such a best-selling vehicle, and is in fact the bread and butter for this company that I'm now employed by? And how do you kind of get your head around that? And that's something that I think, Anthony Lowe, who is incumbent, going to be taking over for Maury Kellum here in a short few months, is going to find out. But it's super interesting, the typology side of things. Obviously, I'm passionate about brand and creativity, but the typology and vehicle typology and how everything kind of fits together in this puzzle that is, design, is something that I find to be quite fascinating. So if we just stay with, what you were doing in the States, because obviously projects take a long time to develop. You would have worked on any number of projects in that 4 years, before moving back to Europe, as you've done, including probably the Mach-E that was unveiled last year. Now, there's something specific that I want to talk with you about, because as within this design circle that I'm in, I hear a lot of, these new platforms enable so much more design freedom, and like, this is great, and we can do X, Y, and Z over this skateboard platform. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole, is this a Mustang thing? I think that's been done to death, and I'd love to hear your opinion on that if you want to tell me it, but that's not the crux of this. I want to discuss more. We talk about all this freedom, but at the same time, it's still a car. At the same time, it still has to communicate certain brand values. For Mustang, it's, got to be Mustang, right? So there's, I guess, a certain leash on your creativity, if you will. And in the last, week here, we've seen a couple of cars that are, in the last year, we've seen a couple of cars that are coming from the same company. I'm not going to go into detail, but I think people will figure out which ones they are. And it's kind of a reskin. It's like a heavy facelift. It's something going from one brand to another. And so in that regard, it's like, how much creativity, how much freedom is there, in terms of building a new vehicle typology or building a new vehicle, period, from an electric platform? Like, how much freedom do you have when you still really have to take care of brand heritage? Maybe people like Tesla or Lucid, some of the startups maybe have more freedom. But for a company that has that level of history, that reputation, how much freedom do you have really with electric car platforms?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that question, because I never have talked about, in my career at least, as what is the sense of freedom. I think if you're in the car design business, you know that there is constraints, and the constraints are, to your point, maybe brand, maybe it's about technical feasibility, maybe it's about marketability. You can have a great idea, but it just might not get to the numbers of sales that as a car company you need to do. You're not making one-offs. You're not an artist that makes one piece of art that you can sell really expensive. No, you're part of a really well oiled machine that you have to create desirability on the basis of a whole bunch of constraints. So that is the interesting part of the business. That's what's making it, I think, such a great puzzle. And electric cars, for me, or that movement is giving us as much constraints or freedoms as what the other cars did. It's just slightly different. It's still built around a human being. It's still made around exactly the same dimensions as what its user is. Now, its biggest limitation is probably the conservatism of the customer. So it's not so much our freedom; it's the conservativeness of the customer that is holding us potentially a little bit back. But we'll always look for new, what you call, and I think it's the right word, is topology, which is a combination of different values that in the end you could call it a new topology. It's a new silhouette. It's a new language. It's a new usage. It's a new operating model. It interacts differently. Again, for me, it's not the technology that is the limiting factor. It's not our creativity that is the limiting factor. For me, it's you're in the car business because you need to sell as many as you can. And in order to sell a certain amount so that it makes sense from a business perspective, that you can have a factory running, building those vehicles, that is ultimately, I guess how you serve the company. That balance that you have to drive then between, conservatism versus how much can you push it so that things are acceptable and you maybe create a ripple effect into the business and into the design world that gives it a different different perspective. I think that's more the ambition that we have.
Yeah. But I mean, at the same time, look, I know that people at Ford do a hell of a lot of customer research and looking into, the customer that currently owns the vehicle, prospective customers, clinics, whatnot. But they are really designing much more user-centric vehicles. I mean, that's something that, is particularly true with the F-150, for example. I mean, they do a hell of a lot of research into what it is that customers want. But at the same time, there's that aspect, and it's a Henry Ford thing as well. It's like, I think it's a Henry Ford. Yeah, it's Henry Ford. So definitely, we're in the blue right here. Is if I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And so you can't always ask the customers what they want. You just kind of have to put it out there and hope that it sticks. But I suppose, to your point, yeah, you want to make sure that the thing that you're proposing is going to sell. And so therefore you can't stray too far away from what it is that they know and buy. So therefore you're kind of a little bit, you can't push that creativity perhaps as much as you would like to, because there's other factors at play that, perhaps prevent you, from making those types of moves within an organization, and certainly an established, company. So I don't know. I mean, look, back in 2007, I remember you telling me that there were structural changes that were taking place within the organization. There's been a few since, but back then you mentioned that there were structural changes within the organization that moved it from being a commodity to being car lines. And so there were design directors responsible for each, vehicle line. And that, I'm assuming that still exists, right? That kind of sectioned off, siloed area, if you will, want to call it that. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily call it siloed, because you do still interact and work with one another, but it's different brands, and so there's or different model lines, I should say, and so there's no silos, if you will, in terms of interior, exterior, and all of the rest, CMF, but it's more specific to model line. And in that time, we've seen Ford pretty much abandon, the car, right, in the States anyway. That's something that's very different than what we knew back then, which is, the car is not something that Ford is really very interested in, specifically in the States, because the dominant vehicle, cars are dead in the US. The dominant vehicle is the SUV, is the trucks. Those are the ones with the highest profit margins. Those are the ones where, that's their bread and butter, like cars like the F-150. But I guess what then is the future of, vehicle format, if you will? When we're looking at things that are happening within the world, there's a lot of things that are going on, different use case scenarios, and Ford is certainly, in terms of partnerships and all of that, involved in some of these things. What do you think is kind of the future for, for car design for a company like Ford? I mean, you don't need to go into necessarily many specifics, but how is that changing? And I mean, I'm sure that's like a huge challenge as well, is like trying to think that, because the European market is different than the US market. And, you and I talked about this actually a bit, about autonomous vehicles, and how easy it is to, have an autonomous vehicle perhaps in a city like a grid system like New York City, for example. But it's very a different scenario and location to, how are you going to geofence Rome or London, or it's very difficult, and those types of scenarios calls for different solutions. So plainly, I suppose, with all of these different things that are coming to the fore right now, what do you think is kind of the most daunting? Then how do you propose to kind of cater to that need, that demand for certain vehicle types for certain environments?
Yeah, I think there is this, and I keep coming back to context and constraints. And you in your question, you already gave a bit of the answer. Is that designing a car for the US is definitely different than designing a car for Europe or designing a car for China. Even though the physicality of the human being is very similar, what they like and how they're going to use the product is very different from depending on which context they live in. That's also and again, you talked about customer research and clinics, and I want to set one thing straight there. It's not so much that I think we're doing customer clinics to find out what people want. What we do customer clinics because we want to know what the liberty is. That's not quite the same. That's to say, it's up to us to be as provocative as we want to be. So I actually found my experimentation in exactly that area. So, and I talked a little bit about it before, where I said I don't have the experiment that I had in my previous job. I actually found it into that area where is maybe being looked at from the outside as one is being conservative and asking the customer what they want. Like I said, it's not really quite that. It's being as provocative as you can be, and actually realize that a lot of the time the customer is actually ready.
Yeah, I mean, it's that whole scale, right? It's like I think it's Raymond Loewy. It's the most advanced yet acceptable, the Maya scale. and you need to kind of push into that. But at the same time, who's to say that, you know, people that are buying F-150s aren't actually ready for something like the Cybertruck? And I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I'm not saying that I like the Cybertruck. I just love to do this because, you know, then it kind of opens up a new series, a new discussion, if you will. But, you know, you need to be able to provide something, as you say, that is advanced, but you also need to not shackle yourself by holding on to heritage. How difficult do you think that is for you? Because look, if you look at Ford of Europe in the UK, which is where I am, it's considered an institution. The company here is like, you know, Ford is a British brand. You know what I mean? In the States, it's very much a US brand, but it has that identity, which is very strange and very unique in terms of automakers, because you'll never say, you know, Porsche is Chinese, right? You'll never, regardless of whether or not they build cars there, you know, it doesn't matter. But Ford,
and it's even one step further, because even in Germany, it's being seen by some people as a German brand as well. And I think it's got to do with the amount of years that you produce locally. I think in the States, there's people saying that Honda is actually from the US because they made the car there, they designed the car there, and they sell it there. So what's still the Japanese part, right? So I think at Ford we have that a lot, simply because Henry was so ambitious and has put his feet into many different areas of the world in a very early stage where nobody was ready to go that global. And the perception of the brand globally is such an important one. We're probably the only brand that can put a car on the market that only costs 9,000 euros as its cheapest piece of transportation, all the way up to a 500,000 GT. It's still got the same badge.
Yeah,
I don't think there's another OEM that can get away with that. So there's something really special there, and that variety of possibilities and listening to the context, or seeing where there's opportunity, I think Ford is really, really good at. And I have to admit, when I came from PSA, which I would say at the time in the car design world, I would consider the haute couture of car design. It was kind of like the I think PSA was at the time a place where creativity was the most important, and was giving us the most extreme ideas and most beautiful visions of what it could be. And I came to Michigan, and it's true that at some point I thought, this feels a little bit more like if France was haute cuisine, then America was McDonald's. And it kind of felt like cars were just produced in such mass and consumed in such mass that it definitely changed my way of how I was looking at car design, and not necessarily for the positive. It really needed. I really needed to adjust it and to that and say, well, I think they're still looking for something really beautiful, something special, something new. It cannot be just another car. It has to be something special. And I think even in little things like the new F-150 that you see, that has this first in the industry fold-out table in the middle that you can work with. Mm-hmm. That was hard work to get that into a product. This where you sell, 60,000-70,000 of a month. Yeah. And that has to have that kind of robust innovation in there. Again, that wasn't only me. That was a whole bunch of really talented people. But these are, I think a pretty big deal.
Oh, for sure.
And that came out of the context of an F-150 is a working tool. An F-150 is a car that people live with every day. if they work with it, if they're standing still, they're having lunch, they're doing all sorts of things. Now, what is making more sense than having some horizontal surface that they can live with? Something simple as that, where all other car interiors are kind of hard to live with. And I think one of its qualities is that this is an easy living, comfortable truck.
Yeah,
which stands out for its own quality.
no, absolutely.
And by the way, you can put some pretty big McDonald's menus put on that table anyway. So
no, I mean, look, I love the F-150 because it is it's definitely something that I'd look into getting if I was living in the States. But as you mentioned, it's something that is very typical for that market, specific for that market, I should say. Whereas when you're working and living, or working in Europe, or even in Australia, where Ford also has a design studio, you guys are doing things that are specific to that market, like in China as well. So I suppose if you look at those different markets, and when I was a kid and there was the one Ford strategy, I always thought was super important that they came out, because before that, I remember there was a Ford that was a completely entirely different model than the one that we were getting in the States here in Europe. And this model here, the Focus, was absolutely incredible. It was like the best handling car. It was like a phenomenal product, but it wasn't sold in the US. We got this dinky, inferior product. And then when Ford came out with this one Ford thing, I was like, this is great, but how is this going to work when the needs, as you mentioned, for customers in, France or the US or Australia, or now indeed in China, differ so vastly that, yes, of course, you understand the economies of scale. You want to create a lot of different proposals off of one platform. For example, the hard points are the same, whatever, right? You got to dress it up.
Yep.
But it's a very, I don't know. I mean, that to me is not, again, if we go to the electric car question, is not freedom, right? It's, you're still constrained by a lot of things. Even if you need to do something very specific for a market, it's kind of like window dressing. Like, okay, we'll make it look better by putting this gold stuff over here, gold leaf, to make it look different. I don't know. I mean, it seems like there are so many constraints put upon designers that it's, even if you do come up with a innovative solution, perhaps upper management won't agree, perhaps marketing won't believe that they can sell it. Maybe, so you need all these people, maybe the board will just be like, shut it down. So there's a lot of, I guess, adversity, if you want to call it that, within. And so that is something that's very interesting. But there is one thing that I want to, and you mentioned talking, you mentioned it briefly earlier, and that's the P1. So I mentioned technology rather earlier when I was talking, and you did as well, in terms of processes. And I know you guys do. I mean, you're not entirely virtual, right? You're not entirely doing stuff on a screen. You still use clay, but to what extent, right? Is it just like, verification? Is it, you're still doing full on multiple clay models? And has that differed over time, like from the time that you were in the US to the time that you're in Europe? Have you seen a difference perhaps in what's going on in the US to the way that, you're working here in Germany? Tell me a little bit about the design process and how you're using technology, in particular with this P1 model, which I know you guys were using, VR and all the rest to go ahead and design and develop that product, which is living in a video game, if I'm not mistaken. And that's something else that that's part two to that question. But
so for me, again, I've always tried to, on one hand, really focus on designing the system that gives me a guaranteed kind of result at the end, That as a minimum starting point. But then, rebel as I am, I want to deviate from that process as much as I can in every project, because the context is asking for it. So there are projects where we hardly touch any clay, or at least to the minimum. And there are projects where we know that we need to do it a lot, because we are looking for a different, the project demands a different result. So it would be really strange to tell a fashion designer there's only one way of working, and you can only work with this fabric and with this, or a cook, you can only work with this ingredients. No, I think what I'm trying to be much more flexible in and it's a challenge in such a big company, but is to see at the right time what kind of tools we need. And sometimes it's completely digital, sometimes it's completely physical, and sometimes it's something in between that could be a light polystyrene model that you project things on, or it could be a interior buck that is quickly made by pieces of carton to kind of sense an environment, but then putting on the goggles to get to that, augmented version of it and start getting the feeling. And I think when we talk about experience design, getting to that feeling and getting towards that idea of what do we want the customer to say, feel, do, and think. That ambition asks for different methodologies every time. And the more agile and flexible we can be in these big companies, the more special the result is going to be moving forward. Otherwise, it's going to be a cookie cutter in the same way as you use the same metal tools and you get the same result. So I want to keep innovate in the way we get into a result. And P1 was one of those ways where, again, we said designing a car for a video game is very different. Then co-creating that together with people that do those games we've never done before, but fits our brand so much because we are co-creating with customers in very innovative ways. And then doing that through social media was the third layer of what is making it special and getting into very different results and unknown results every step of the way. Because again, this is a program where people might think that I knew exactly from day one what it was going to be. I didn't. It was really one step of the way, and we had to live with whatever decisions were made before. We're going to adapt to that and take the most out of that of the previous step and getting it to the next one. So it was a great learning exercise for the people involved to train yourself to be ready for the unknown and adapt in a very agile way and overcome challenges that you didn't think you were going to overcome.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, for anyone in the creative environment, I think that journey of discovery is something that is absolutely beautiful.
Absolutely.
And you really want to hold on to that as much as possible, because you never really want to know what is going to be the outcome, and you love being surprised at the end of it, and hopefully pleasantly surprised, but nonetheless. So I mean, this thing. So the P1, the Fordzilla project, started last year, and it was a virtual design. And again, I recently received a press release about the collaboration of Ford with the F-150 with Rocket League, another video game.
Yes, sir.
And so granted that's probably out of your purview as it's the F-150. I mean, I know you guys compete on projects, but perhaps you guys don't necessarily have input on certain projects. Tell me if I'm wrong here. But to me, that's a very unique North American product that you guys probably don't sketch on and contribute ideas towards. I could be mistaken, though. Am I? Like, do you?
No,
do you
no.
okay.
You're right. We collaborate really well on projects that are in several markets. So if it is something like a Mach-E, or if it's a Mustang, or it's a Ford Edge, or it's say cars that are in several markets, we usually do some competition or help each other out on design creativity or design delivery. So that's very normal practice. Now, this idea of looking at the gaming industry, or gamification, as we call it, the experience, the experiential part of the business, it exists in that gaming industry in a much more profound way as what we do. So I think it's something that we can learn from, and that we can continue to suck out the most amount of creativity and the most amount of new ways of how to look at experience design. If it is about how to adapt to life scenarios, all the way up to how can we make owning a car more fun. These are fundamental questions that we haven't really asked before. It was always about the driving itself. Is it fun to drive, or does it shift in the right way? It's like, okay, we've kind of gone beyond that now and say, okay, how much fun is it to really be part of a brand and being part of owning a product and its service and its flexibility, its adaptability to my life, which is a new way of thinking about the entire industry, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's exactly what you said. Like, back in the early 2010s, the next frontier was interior. Now, for the last few years, it's been, what is UX? And I think a lot of people don't actually still know, within companies themselves, still don't know how to communicate that, brand identity, that experience, that, which is basically what user experience is. Everything. I mean, there's so much that goes into that, and like, how do you tell that story? So, you can tell the exterior story. You can, hopefully create something that is in the very beginning of our conversation. You mentioned beauty, and I think beauty is still subjective, right? Some people might look at something and say, "Hey, that's beautiful," or "That's your beautiful girl." Maybe she is, but some guy might not think she's as beautiful as the other guy, right? But the car is the same way. Maybe something is beautiful to one person, but not to another. I think at the end of the day, it's got to be, serve that function. And that's inherently where the beauty is, there is good design and there is bad design, in my opinion, because one, fills and serves to fulfill a certain number of different priorities, if you will, or, ticks a lot more off the box, a lot more of the boxes, I should say. Whereas, another one might not, maybe it'll fall short, in which case then, beauty is part of that equation. But anyway, I'm diverse.
I mean, it's a super fine kind of balance and challenge. There is something obviously universally beautiful that we all know that that there is a natural beauty into things, into humans, into whatever, and that where probably there's a base that is really non-negotiable. that is being liked by a lot of people.
Yeah.
Then there is that extra layer of, and now we're going to make it special, or now we're going to make it fit to where we stand for, or now we're going to have a really strong point of view that is getting us into a different kind of territory, or now we're getting into an innovation where it really pushes the limit to what you might be able to accept, at least at this point of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have to admit, sometimes it works out, and sometimes at the journey, and we see many examples in the car industry in the past, and we see it now as well. You can see where the design team at certain products, they were on the right track, but they were stopped short early. We as professionals can see that in products, or where you look at a product and you say, well, they got it almost right, but you probably can't blame the designers, because they know that that's not right. So there must have been other circumstances that overtook at some point the part that gave it that natural beauty.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is other moments where you say, oh, that it's naturally beauty, but it's got a quirky side to it, and it makes it intriguing, and it makes it characterful and very special. Okay, these are all valid things, I think, that we see in the industry, and I certainly hope that it continues to do so, because it usually gets pretty boring if everybody is going to do a pretty car and kind of like fulfills the current status of what things have to be according to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
It's always the ones that push that little step forward that help us to get us to the next level.
Absolutely. And I think that's really necessary, is the risk takers, and the ones that are, perhaps they won't make it, but nonetheless, they're enabling others to take that step, or, at least show that it can be done. So in that regard, like, let's go back a little bit to the P1. Was that like a marketing thing? Was that like a decision to say, hey, all these young people are playing video games now. How is it that we get something that they can relate to, because they're not buying our cars or whatever? Like, how do we communicate with them? What was the goal, I suppose, like with that? Like, what was it to attract a younger demographic into the Ford brand? I mean, what was the reasoning behind doing something like that?
I wouldn't say it's a marketing trick. I would say that a customer-focused company like Ford Motor Company is always looking into what is the next level of customer engagement. And when I started working in Ford of Europe, which was, by the way, very new and uncomfortable for me when I started doing that job. But I can talk about that later.
No, but let's go off on a little tangent right now. Like, tell me, because now I'm interested. I'm curious. Why were you uncomfortable?
So, well, when you are interior design director globally for Ford Motor Company, I kind of compare that with very important, talented people doing work for the United Nations, but you don't know them. You don't know anybody necessarily in the United Nations that is famous for things, but boy, I'm sure they're doing very, very important work behind the scenes too. That's how I felt as a global interior design director. And suddenly they went to the United Nations and they said, okay, now you're the king of a country. So I became the king of a country in Ford of Europe, which meant a much more broader responsibility, and not just about design, but also about a region, about buildings, being responsible for processes in a much broader way, from making sure that the toilets were cleaned all the way up to, how to design a car. That's a different type of job. Now, of course, you have a team that surrounds you that deals with stuff, but nevertheless, it was a very different role. And on top of that, I did not have the experience of exterior design that probably most people would have to get in, that would go into this role. So we've known in the past in the industry a lot of exterior design specialists that do interior design on the side, or that do UX on the side. The other way around, you don't see a lot. So that for me was a challenge when I started in Ford Europe. And Murray at the time asked, "Are you going to be up for it?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. I'll learn, and I'll make sure that you'll be impressed." And that was a steep learning curve for me in the first 1.5 year. I don't lie about it. Luckily, there is really talented people in my team, and they had to get used to that I would ask all these stupid questions. It's kind of naive, and I had a bit of experience, but I would continue to ask why is this, why is that, and only then, by accepting that situation, I could learn really, really quickly, and we'll get to see the results soon at some point.
No, for sure. But what you just said reminds me of this Steve Jobs quote, right? Why hire people? Why hire smart people so that you can tell them what to do? We hire smart people so that they can tell us what to do. So if you've got
Absolutely.
people that are experts in exterior design that have been doing this for a while, that are working in this market, of course they're going to come back and they're going to want to bounce ideas off of you, and you're going to need to sign off. But you have other qualifications, other areas, I suppose, that you are way stronger, where you can, as you mentioned earlier, support that team and bring them up. But ultimately, you have to really trust them. You hired them for a reason. Hopefully, they know what it is that they're doing, and you can take care of other things like interior, like UX, like getting the bean counters to sign off on X, Y, and Z. There's other responsibilities being where you are.
Yeah, you're right. Nevertheless, I think if you would talk to my exterior designers, they would probably say, "Well, Amko has really pushed us to think about things in a different way, or to move the business into a different way, or deal with our circumstances in a different way, or look at the world in a way that it helps me to stimulate creativity in a different way." So I'm
not saying you didn't do anything.
No. It's fine. It's fine. It's just so interesting. Where again, I think when that we assume that a good exterior designer can do everything else, and an interior designer has to learn it in a different way. Now, and I admit that was the case, and that was an exciting kind of time, and now I feel completely comfortable, and it's just a lot of fun pushing the teams around.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, people expect, and it's true. I mean, for the most part, people expect an exterior guy who's done exteriors their entirety of their career to come in and be able to manage other aspects of the team. But I would argue, and perhaps I'm misinformed, but I've heard quite a lot of designers say, "Oh, I'm an exterior guy. I couldn't do exteriors. It's too hard." Because there's so much going on in an interior that you have to take into account everything else that's a hard fixed point, whereas an exterior, you know, especially with surfacing, you've got more freedom, more room to play. You know, of course, you've got, you know, certain things like belt lines or whatever that you know you need to kind of make something work, right? But I think interiors are far more challenging. So anyway, so
yeah, they are for sure complicated in a different way, and the amount of pieces that you manage is bigger. So that way you kind of multitask much more than if you can work around, let's say, a search for a sculpture on exterior design and then slowly go into the details. That is more of a linear process, I would say. Well, interiors is always kind of a mess. You know, it's kind of a man and a man brains and a woman brains, right? It's like the exterior is kind of like going from A to B, and you can kind of count on where it's supposed to go. And on interiors, it just doesn't stop turning its back on itself and re-questioning it. Both of them are super exciting processes and give a very different emotional attachment to it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, definitely. It's fascinating to hear that. You know, I don't talk to all that many people that have reached that level in their career in terms of industrial design and being able to translate that. But again, like for me, I think that it's important to have that understanding of, as you mentioned, it being a completely different beast, you know, from the one that is an exterior designer. And, you know, there's a lot going on within that. So let me move on to a couple other questions here, because I realize that we've been kind of talking for a long time here. But I would.
But it's fun.
Yeah, no, it is fun. I do appreciate your time. I don't want to take advantage of it here. But there is a kind of a bigger question that I want to ask that is kind of an open-ended one as well. And I suppose, you know, in terms of, we talked a little bit about, you know, some of the challenges, you know, perhaps that are, you know, we're facing nowadays. I suppose, you know, for you, someone in your role that's overseeing a market that's quite important, you know, the European market, for a large brand, a huge company, you know, how do you kind of view what's happening right now in the automotive design industry? Like, what do you think about the current state of it? And is there anything that you foresee? Because I know you're a very optimistic person. I know that there's a, you know, a silver lining.
I was about to give a very optimistic answer.
Yeah, right. You're very optimistic always, but you know, and that's great. You know, you always want to see the positivity. No one wants to see somebody drowning in their own negativity and sorrows. Like, it's always nice to see the silver lining in the cloud, like I say. But nonetheless, there are some things that we don't have answers to. And yes, design and indeed life is a journey of discovery in itself. But there's some daunting stuff out there. No one knows, you know, and you have to kind of reinvent yourself. You can't continue to do things. I mean, in a range of different industries, it's the same, but it's not business as usual. So what do you think are some, first of all, what do you think of the current state of the automotive design or industry? Where are we kind of failing? Where are, you know, the potential glimmers of hope? Where do you think we're doing well? Like, you know, and if anything, what's kind of the most daunting aspect of this new future? So not to give it a pessimistic side here, but nonetheless, we don't know what to expect, right?
Yeah, I like your question. I do have to give a positive answer though. It's stronger than myself. It's I remember a couple of years ago where we were all chasing German quality. And frankly, car design was about very small, everybody was getting the same amount of quality. And, it's like, and I remember back in the day, I thought, this is kind of boring. This is kind of like, is this going to continue like this? Is this going to be just a, like a slow path moving forward, and we're getting better and better in it? And okay, we're getting a little bit more interior design excitement, but when do we get to see a circumstance that we can really latch onto as a design community and embrace new and unknown things? Well, guess what? They're here. So for me, it's a kind of a gift, and not at all daunting at all. It's a gift that we are moving towards different vehicle architectures through electric cars. It's a gift that we are looking at the commercial vehicle business in a very through a new lens, where there's new competitors coming into the market. Keeps us great on our toes and makes us wanting to succeed and recognize our own strong point and make them even stronger. I've loved the AV movement, where you're really, again, putting a really new spin around what cars and are in terms of value, what cars are in terms of ownership and the business model. And boy, it couldn't be more different. It couldn't be more different than those years where everybody was chasing Volkswagen quality. Whatever. You never hear somebody talking about that anymore.
Right.
So I really don't feel that, Eric, and it's not because I'm just a positive guy. I'm just saying this is a designer's dream. And the fact that we might not know exactly where it's going, that's where the design community is feeling pretty comfortable and sees, the opportunities to experiment and get our, how can I say, addiction to the new. We're always ready for the new or for the unknown. That's what makes us special. The rest of the company hates it because they love the metrics. They love the predictability, so we can build our business on it. Yeah. And we always say, well, what if?
Yeah. No, good answer. I mean, way to be optimistic, of course, but within that optimism is like, we need to cater to these new paradigms. We need to create vehicles that, are going to suit a use case. We, need to switch out of this. And again, like you said earlier, I mean, designers have huge responsibilities, in the world. The world is changing around us. There's huge issues that we're being faced with daily. I'm not just talking environmental issues, but yes, there are environmental issues as well. That's just one of them. But there's loads of things that, we need to do in order to create a better society. And I think designers are, have the tools to do that. But of course, nothing's done in a bubble, and you need to have a company that supports you and people that understand and can kind of, create stuff in unison in order to better the environment, the culture, the world that we're living in. So,
I'm just wondering though. I'm just wondering, Eric, what is when we talk about responsibility for designers? In my previous job as an architect, I think in that field there's always that kind of like upper goal to kind of like give people something that kind of teaches them be different, or to have a little critique of the existent of an existent movement, for example, right? So it's this. Now, this critique, I don't think it exists sufficiently within the industry of cars.
Mm.
So you're saying environmental issues might be some, but I would say maybe we don't know yet. Maybe the amount of screens that we surround ourselves is not going to be a very healthy way of moving forward. So as a car maker, are we okay with that? With saying, well, the screen is the most important thing that, I would love to make a car interior now that doesn't have any screen in it. And let's see what happens. Let's see what we can build to create that excitement. How do you communicate then? Because it's almost like this, the screen development has almost like distracted the industry in a way that is not necessarily moving it so fast forward. It's just same stuff. It's your whole interior becomes just a screen. Now, is that really where we want to go? And I think these and that's why it's important what you just said. That critical touch upon of having that responsibility and having a critique of what's there is where we live for.
Mm-hmm.
And what we should be focusing on.
Yeah,
that for me is maybe the most daunting. What you asked for, before is like, what's that? How can you be that? How can you give that critique and give something else to the customer that's more healthy, or more gives them more free time, or gets them a more organized life that they love, or those are the real goals.
Mm. Yeah. No, but when I said environment, I wasn't just talking about the air quality, for example. I mean, because especially in interiors and CMF, I mean, people have realized now, that sustainability plays a huge role in what it is that we are offering. Companies are offering customers, and the consumption of goods is very detrimental to the environment in terms of the Earth's environment. But of course, what you talk about in terms of screens, I mean, I think we've reached peak screen, right? I mean, how much larger can you go when you've got 50-inch screen, from a pillar to, from pillar to pillar, just covering the entirety. Like, I think we're going to see legislation pop in here and say, hey, hold on a second, you can't just have a screen over here, and how distracting could that potentially be? And if they don't, I think we're going to reach a point where people are going to say, you know what, enough, unplug. I don't want to see this. The ultimate luxury for me is to be disconnected from that, to have this relaxed sanctuary. I mean, you see these things in student projects as well, right? It's like no screens.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think we're going to get to that point at some point where people are going to have the option of saying, hey, yeah, I want that 50-inch screen, or I don't want a screen at all. And I think even in the past, there were examples of cars where, the screen would pop out of the IP, so you could have it if you wanted it. You could push a button when you didn't. And I think that was brilliant. It probably added a lot of complexity and cost to the product, which is why it was only made in a luxury car, premium car nonetheless. But regardless, I think there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of, people nowadays, and you mentioned this, expect certain things. Whoever comes out with a car that has 0 screens in it, and it isn't like a £6,000 runabout or €6,000, city car, is going to it's going to have some issues. They're going to have some questions that they need to answer, and whether or not they can answer those questions in a luxury car with no screens? What? You can't watch TV in the passenger side while hanging upside down? Like, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
that's some interesting topic of conversation there. But anyway,
Absolutely.
we can talk about this forever. But I do want to talk about a couple of different things just to kind of wind down this conversation. One, you brought up autonomy. I'm personally quite pessimistic. Again, unlike you, I don't think that we're going to see any type of autonomy coming to us in the future. Not in the near future anyway, because there's so many things that even though technology can answer certain questions for us right now and can do the things that we ask of it, I think there's a lot of other questions that are being asked that cannot be answered by technology. And, you know, it's asking for that technology to make too many decisions at the moment, which is something that I'm not comfortable with. And I don't think a lot of legislators are going to be comfortable with either. Where do you stand on this?
I think the artificial intelligence is, I think, more the topic. And I think artificial intelligence can help us creating more specific experience designs that we weren't able to do before. So I would say, and that's not, you know, let's say where necessarily my company states for. I'm just saying from a personal perspective.
Yes,
I think artificial intelligence is the key that we invest in, and that we use that artificial intelligence to maybe let cars drive by itself. For me, that's almost a byproduct. There is many things you can do before you can actually have cars drive by itself with artificial intelligence that really help to don't want to sound too Ford cheesy, but serve the customers in a new way. And there's many opportunities there.
Okay. No, that's cool. I mean, you know, you. The reason I wanted to ask you this is because obviously you're on the front lines. You deal with this. You know a lot of things that I don't know. I'm just looking at things from a perspective that is very much an exterior perspective. And you know, I was very interested in knowing your personal opinion, because at the end of the day, this is a conversation that I'm having with you, not in, you know, as not your company, but nonetheless. I appreciate that answer, and you know, I guess we'll just have to wait and see, because there's a lot of things that are going to need to be passed and put forward before we can take a trip in an autonomous car.
Well, you know. and I can complete it a little bit with what I said before. I think circumstantial is important. So. I could, and I don't want to answer it too general, but when the context is simple, it's more easy to have things automated. When a context is complicated, it's going to be more difficult and it's going to take more time. And, you know, it's probably a good first step, but there is again, I keep coming back to this idea of artificial intelligence. The fact that cars become intelligent, no matter what you can do with it, is the big revolution. Not so much if they in the end can drive by itself, but any intelligence that the car can help us leading our life better or more healthier or more exciting or more, you know. So for me, that AV technology is about giving that product finally intelligence that it didn't have before, because frankly, it was stupid. You do this and the car does this. That's all the car ever was doing.
Yeah.
Now at least we're getting towards, well, the car is gonna suggest you doing probably other things. That's the big movement.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's this conversation could go on for another hour. Like, I think there is a certain appeal to a raw car with like no power assisted anything that does what you tell it to do regardless of whether or not it's going to, you know, pull a pendulum on itself and start spinning around at the next corner. I think that is raw appreciation and enjoyment.
Absolutely.
And I absolutely abhor these lane keep and, you know, vehicles that brake for me when they think I'm going to crash into something. Like, I know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? That drives me mentally. Like, I can't stand that. And I think there's a place for that. You know, if there's a 16-year-old kid on the road for the first time, you know, make sure that he's staying within his lane, make sure he's not crashing into any brick walls. But somebody that likes to drive and does certain things with a car, I don't need some nannying device that's going to slam on the brakes when I'm trying to make a turn.
So,
you know what I mean?
Turn it off. It's fine.
If you can.
That's the cool thing. You can choose.
You can't shut some of these off. Like, I remember one time it scared me half to death because I was driving in California, and you got to do this when you're driving in California because no one stays to the right. And as I'm doing this, there was plenty of room. And as I'm coming into this lane, the car decided to slam on the brakes because there was another car on this lane. And that was just probably the worst thing it could have done at that time. You know, I mean,
yeah, you were probably driving a rental that you didn't know very well.
No, I wasn't driving a rental. I was driving a Lexus. But you're right. I did
say it's not a Ford.
I did not know it very well. This is years ago anyway, and this is at the start of it, right? When everybody was like battling to put things into their cars. And it was a brilliant car, an absolutely brilliant car, except for the fact that you couldn't shut that thing off. And if you wanted to get around somebody, because the way that the cars are, it's like playing a game of Frogger out there. It was impossible to, you know, get the car to, and finally I set the distance so that it was less sensitive, but nonetheless, I mean, it was still like that moment, the first time it kicked on, I was like, what the hell is this? I'm going to die. And that's not necessarily helping me out, right? So anyway, there's a lot of things in terms of technology that I'm like.
So yeah, you're right. We can talk about it for probably an hour because I love both. I love the rawness of my Volvo P1800 in my garage that is named Tracy, and I love to take Tracy out, and it's such an engaging experience going around every corner, around every straight, in every gear change, and you're busy with driving.
Yeah.
But then I can give you the example of when and a little bit of commercial talk here for Ford, when in that not in the last generation Ford Focus, but even already the generation before, had so much driving technology in it that was comparable to a Mercedes S-Class. And I remember I was still going back to my home that I didn't have sold yet in France. And I was doing a game that I tried to drive from Cologne all the way up to Paris without using the brakes, because it was going to brake automatically for me, and I would just put it on 130. Now, what was different about that type of driving is that I needed to find drivers that I needed to drive like I would in that situation and gear my car towards them. That's a very different type of driving than this driving experience of the Volvo. Nevertheless, it's a very different and new experience that I've been doing for a very long time. So I can see the self-driving technologies, just like ABS systems were first tested on Formula Ones to get to brake later and to brake while going through a corner, and it helped us driving more safely in the real world. And I think these technologies will help us to drive more safely moving forward. Now, what is stopping us as designers to say, okay, now we got that technology, now let's use that technology to make it more exciting to drive. So can autonomous driving help me responsibly drive like a complete lunatic. It depends how you're looking at it.
Right. Yeah.
And it could help me to drive pretty extreme.
Yeah, but look, I mean, there's always that element of. I watched this thing the other day on this water park in New Jersey. Now, you probably don't know anything about this, but it was called Action Park. I grew up in New York City, and I would always see in the 80s and 90s commercials about this water park. And this water park looked like the most fun you could ever have. The problem was that people were going to this water park and they were dying, and they were getting injured because the thing was like, it was under this veil of being, fun, but you're safe, but you were not actually safe. Now, the reason people kept going to this water park was because of that risk element, because they were like, yeah, you never know what's going to happen at Action Park, but I'm going to have the thrill of my life if I live through it, And that is why you drive a 1969 911 like a bat out of hell through a corner. Because you never know if the back end's not going to swing around on you or if you're going to make it through to the other side. But that's the thrill of it. I don't want some car that's going to take over and make sure that I make that turn perfectly. I want to make that turn perfectly. Anyway, maybe that's just me being old. I don't know. Like, I don't want something that's going to enable me to
think
feel
about
the sensations that I don't have.
Maybe that self-driving technology you can build into your old 911, and it will show you that you can go far beyond the limit that you even dared.
Probably not possible, but okay.
And do it with you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're a tough guy that has been showing all the limits and have gone through, wavy roads in Europe and almost disappeared into a ravine. I know.
No, I'm just saying I like that experience. I like knowing that there might be a limit that I don't know about, or that I might get over, But at the same time, it's the thrill of it, and I enjoy that part of it. But I'm not saying I drive like a bat out of hell every time, but I like to be in control of that situation. And if I've got something that I know is going to reel me back, I'll probably take for more risks just to test it out and see if it does. But I don't.
There we go.
I don't know if human. Yeah, but at the same time, it's gonna reel me back in, make sure I don't hurt myself. It's like if I'm being a dumbass, I probably should hurt myself. You know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, anyway, it's an interesting topic for conversation. So I appreciate you going down this route with me. But no, so like, okay, let's wrap this up. I know you told me about your P1800, which is absolutely brilliant. I know you've had that car for a very long time. What color did you say it was?
It's this light blue that I think about 70% of them were sold. They had this light blue and this gold. Sorry, I'm really bad in names of colors, but it was always in the advertisement as light blue and this kind of gold. And this is the P1800 ES. So some people would tell me, "Oh, it's the wagon."
Yeah, it's not the coupe, but you've got this huge glass rear. Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah. It's the only real shooting brake, I would say.
Okay.
And in Germany they call it Schneeweißchen, so Snow White. So it's a little bit dark because obviously it's a bit like it's got to do with death and things, but it's a really interesting car. My kids are usually asking me if we can go for another drive, because also they see that beauty of purity, what you've been talking about, and they see me working, driving the car instead of to your point, letting it go automatically and have all the time for them and have conversations while they would talk to me while we're driving in the Volvo, and I would say, well, okay, but I need to drive. Yeah, I need to concentrate. Very different experience.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So do you have any other, I know you drive a Mustang, that's your company car, which is probably right now is probably in the garage somewhere, and you substituted it for something else.
Substituted for a Ranger Raptor.
Okay.
Which is a lot of fun.
Good winter car for sure.
Good winter car. I bought myself one of these roof tents, and I go out on the weekend with the family. So very much of an I guess a different experience car. It's what I love about Ford Motor Company. They have such a wide range of vehicles that we can have. So yeah, at the moment it's a white Ranger Raptor, and we'll see what the next one is going to hold. I did got my motorcycle license during the COVID time. So I'm this typical almost 50-year-old looking for a new thrill and a new skill.
Nice.
And since 4 months, I've got my motorcycle license. So I'm going into a whole new world that is opening up for me. So
that's awesome.
Looking forward to that when the weather is going to be better.
Very cool. Very cool. So motorcycling, pickup trucks, Volvo, shooting brakes. What else does Amko Leenarts do on his spare time when you're not designing or talking about or riding motorcycles or cars? What else are you interested in besides family, obviously, which is a huge part of your life, as it should be. What else do you do?
What I don't do enough but what I love to do is painting, and usually it's not cars at all. It's a different type of painting. Usually, it's got to do more with my previous passion. It usually has some sort of architecture things in it. So love doing that, but don't do it enough. I do a bit of running, and have done that more and more in the last 1.5 years. So it's the only way to kind of like in the busy jobs that we have to kind of stay fit. Would love to do a team sport. I just can't commit to another group of people. I've got too many groups of people already in my life.
Yeah.
So running is probably the better way.
Running does clear the head, though. It clears the head.
Yeah.
You're just out there.
The head.
It's good. That's a good.
If I kind of like as a precise sport, if I can do a bit of golf, I would do a bit of golf. I love that, kind of 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning when it's cold and be there by myself and just the birds and trying to do this ridiculous sport where, you have to take a little small ball, 200 plus meters to the other side and somehow get it into a hole.
Yeah.
It's truly ridiculous, but it's really fun. It's good to do.
It's a challenge.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Nice one. So last question for you, Amko, tonight. There's a lot of people, young guys, aspiring designers, people that are looking to move up that corporate ladder, right?
Yeah.
What advice would you impart to, let's start with the young guys first, those that are looking to get into design, and then, at another level, the managers, the people that are looking to move up. What advice would you impart? What advice can you give them?
Well, I guess what I I'm maybe hoping to have given in this talk is, I would say, as a new car designer, I think it does mean total dedication. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to succeed. It's all about the passion, and it's never giving up on that dream that you want to become one, and that there is really that no matter what motivation that I see around me, that those are the people that succeed.
Mm-hmm.
The one that kind of got there comfortably don't really get to the next level either. Once you're in the business, I always appreciate a lot of people that have an open mind to learn new things. So people that not stick to only interior design or only exterior design or only UI or UX and actually really open up to become that wider or deeper skill. So the earlier you open up yourself to that, the faster I think you will grow into any company, which is usually uncomfortable because you're going to learn things that you didn't knew you were going to do or that you could do. Sometimes it might feel as I'm doing a step back in comparison with what I did, but it will be 2 steps forward later on. So being uncomfortable with that is really, really good, and I appreciate people being able to do that step. I appreciate as well people that are specialists and want to only do one thing and want to continue to do this one thing and become really good at that. But usually I see the variety of skill set development as a real important asset for any company, and with it there is this focus on a bigger purpose of design and less about this kind of individual artistry that I think sometimes car designers are being pushed into.
Mm-hmm.
This really kind of individual, I did this car, or like usually it's a team of people and circumstances made you being able to do these things. Yeah, so it's that kind of humbleness as well that I think sometimes lacks a little bit in the industry. And if you see that with younger people, that they can handle that and being ambitious at the same time, you usually know that you've got a pretty good talent there.
Awesome.
Does that answer it?
Yeah, man. No, that's great. I love that. You touched on so many different things that I would know to be true. That's amazing. So, Amko, thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to have this conversation with me. It's been a great pleasure to have you on this podcast.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, as do I.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.